you're a true leader, you should be able to identify the pathways which will improve any circumstance. I think that people that are upbeat just naturally attract other upbeat people. They're the people you want to surround yourself with.
Colin Powell, the former US Secretary of State, famously said that perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. That quote has always stuck with me. I'm Elliott Donazzan, a young CEO working with public sector leaders across the country. And in my role and in these organisations, there are always challenges to be faced. But I've found that looking for the positives and optimistically overcoming the hurdles has always led to the most success. Our guest on this episode of Lessons from Local Government Leaders agrees. Today, I'm going to be introducing you to Paul Bennett. Paul is an amazing leader full of shareable wisdom. Paul has worked in local government for more than 30 years, and 20 of those have been as a general manager. Paul is now the GM of Tamworth Regional Council in New South Wales, where he's led the organisation for 13 years. Paul has a fantastic enablement philosophy. He's been using the power of concepts like business partnering and his tribal council to really drive his council and his community forward. Let's dive in to today's lessons from local government leaders. Paul, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for giving me some of your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Paul, you're clearly a very respected and accomplished local government leader. Can you tell us, how did you get started in the sector?
Yeah, a bit of a funny story about that. I left high school thinking I was going to be a nurse and somehow just fell into local government. I was lucky enough to do a Rotary Youth Leadership Award, and one of the gentlemen that selected me to do that was actually the Deputy Town Clerk at Armidale Council. And straight after I'd finished that award, he offered me a job with Armidale Council. So I've been now in local government for about 36 years.
That's fantastic. And have you ever looked at not being in local government? Have you ever thought, well, my time's coming to an end, and looked into the private sector but decided not to?
Oh, look, not that I went looking to go into the private sector, but I certainly got approached by the private sector on a number of occasions. I've worked with some pretty successful councils, and I guess you get a very broad range of leadership skills. Working in local government, we're a very complex organisation, and I think people in the private sector have seen that there's a lot of skills that come with that. But, you know, I love coming to work every day. I love the fact that we make a contribution to community every day. You essentially build the world you live in to some degree. So, yeah, no, I've really enjoyed it, and I think I'll be a lifer.
I think it's interesting you said there the skills that you have in local government, a lot of the private sector's interested in. What's really struck me as I've spent more and more time with CFOs or finance managers in the sector is that the standard that I see in finance teams in local government is significantly higher than the average finance team in, say, an equivalent medium-sized or larger-sized business. Would you agree with that, Paul?
Look, I definitely agree with it. I think the difference between local government and the private sector, especially from a finance perspective, is, number one, the complexity of the business, just the diversity of the business units that we have in an organisation like ours. I think we have about 62 different types of functions. So you're talking about everything from a roads crew doing construction through to an events team running the country music festival. And, you know, the financial sort of implications of that are different. And then you're bound not only by the normal accounting standards, but also the legislation around local government, the way we're funded, the way we can actually use our money, the way we can raise funds. And so it's a very complex area. I must say, when I studied taxation finance, that was pretty tough.
So let's say you saw a deputy CFO or a finance manager, and they rung you up and they said, Paul, I've seen good things. I'm in this role at a medium-sized organisation. I've always had a passion to give back. I've wanted to look at local government, but Paul, tell me, what's the biggest difference I should know now, or what's the thing to watch before I start taking a leap into local government?
Oh, look, from a finance person, I don't know there's anything you really have to look out for. I think a lot of people that come into local government from the private sector become a little bit frustrated about the size of the beast and how slowly it moves. I mean, obviously there's a lot of community consultation around projects and so on. And I think in the private sector, you can move much more quickly with projects and actions and so on. And here, it's definitely a slower process. So people that are used to the excitement and the sort of fly by the seat of your pants type thing in the commercial sector probably find it a little bit slower when they come across into local government. But I guess what I would say to somebody who was coming into finance would be, be prepared for the complexity. Be prepared to have to come up with different types of budgeting, different types of management accounting, different types of reporting for different parts of the business. It's not like you've just got one business that covers everything. You've got these incredibly diverse business units.
Let's change tack here, because you and I, we both featured in a webinar recently, and I have to say I was pretty disappointed because most of the attention and the questions from sort of the 50 or so people that came to watch us speak were aimed entirely at you. So it was myself, a partner at BDO, Michael Shave, the president of the local government finance professionals up in Queensland, and you. And if I could say that I've ever had people more interested in a guest, I'd be shocked because they were. Now, what seemed to pique everyone's interest was your business partnering model that you've developed and you've introduced here at Tamworth. Could you maybe spend a minute or two explaining what that is for the listeners? And then I'd love to ask you a few questions about why you've done it and what you've seen and perhaps what you were trying to achieve specifically.
So the idea of having business partners is, again, recognising the complexity of local government, is that if you've got groups of people that might be highly skilled, whether it's around finance, IT, HR, for example, it's really difficult for them to provide a service to the whole organisation as a group. So the idea about business partners is that somebody in each of those sort of corporate service areas of the organisation are essentially embedded into the different directorates. So, for example, our regional services, which is our engineering section, they have a dedicated finance specialist, they have a dedicated HR specialist, they have a dedicated IT specialist, and also a dedicated communication specialist. Now, while those people still sit in their team, whether it's finance, IT, and so on, they get to learn in detail about the part of the business that they're servicing, because I think you've got to face it. We speak different languages. Engineers speak different languages to planners, to different language to accountants and IT people. So by embedding people into those parts of the business, they get to learn the language of the business unit they're servicing. And it doesn't mean they do all of that type of work for that business unit. What they do is they understand the business, they bring that back to their broader team, and then the team comes up with a solution knowing exactly what the problem is, rather than having it confused by having to approach different people and nobody really understanding what the outcome is they're trying to achieve. So they essentially become a specialist in that part of the business, and we roll that out across the organisation.
So it sounds very logical, and it's very akin to a lot of the corporates that I've worked with, where you embed a specialist, they sit across multiple teams, they get that deeper subject matter expertise, but they're still accountable through their own function, but they can report specific metrics that they're not accountable for, but they understand why things are happening in that team. It's not just here's the data and let's send it up.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
That's exactly right. It's not a standard response. It's a customised service to each part of the business. And, we see it really comes down to things like, your budgeting and your management accounting and so on, but particularly around software and new technology that's coming into the market. If somebody in IT doesn't understand the outcomes that business unit is trying to achieve, it's really hard to sort of say, this is a solution that's good for the organisation. When we're as complex as we are, you can't just say, we're going to have the one type of software that's going to satisfy everybody, because it simply won't. So the business partners are about getting that in-depth knowledge, just like in the commercial sector, and applying that in a local government context.
Fantastic. So let's zoom in on that. So that specialist, what level would they be? Would they be a manager level? Would they be a coordinator level?
They are typically a senior. So for us in this organisation, all of our senior accountants are assigned as being business partners to a different part of the organisation. Our finance area is a little bit different, and we've adopted a bit of a different structure across the organisation, where we always have a strategic person. So our CFO is a very strategic finance person, and then we have a manager of finance as well. And the manager of finance deals at that transactional day-to-day, make sure we do all our statutory accounting right, make sure we do all of our management accounting and meet all our reporting obligations. Whereas the CFO is more about the business planning, the longer-term financial strategy. And same with HR and same with IT, where we have somebody that's looking at that at a strategic level, and then we have a manager. And then below them, they have all the senior skilled people. So people have to be experienced. They have to be able to understand the local government context and what the limitations are of what we can and can't do. So we typically find it's somebody, they might have 5 years experience in local government, but are typically a fairly senior person in the team.
Now, Paul, traditionally the Director of Corporate Services takes more of a strategic role, but at Tamworth you decided to abolish that role entirely. That sounds quite dramatic. But is that right?
Yeah, look, that was a really difficult decision. We had an outstanding individual here as the Director of Corporate Services. But I think what I've found, because having historically, or before I became a general manager, I was in a similar sort of role, was that no matter where you've come from, you have a bias. If you're a director of corporate service and you come from a finance background, you're going to have a financial tendency, or you're going to have an IT tendency, or you're going to have a HR tendency, or maybe even a governance tendency. And I always found then at the executive table, you were getting a filtered view of some of the other areas. So again, a lot of directors of corporate come from finance. They don't really get the IT stuff, or they don't really get the people stuff in the organisation. So I felt as an executive, and we don't call our team the executive team, we call it tribal council, and I guess we can talk about that.
Yeah, let's come back to that, because that's another interesting one.
So I always felt that we weren't getting the whole story around those other parts of corporate, that it was always coming through a bit of a filter. So now we have a CFO, a CIO and a CPO, Chief People Officer, and they sit around the table with tribal council and provide direct advice to me and the other directors in the organisation.
If it sounds so logical, and it certainly does from my perspective, from the commercial sphere, it's unusual to not have people embedded who become specialists. Why do you think it's not the normal way of doing things in local government?
Local government is a very traditional type of industry. For some reason, we're like sheep. We just follow what everybody else does and often won't take a step backwards and rethink. And I think, I've been fortunate enough to employ some really clever people that have come out of the private sector, and they're the ones that have sort of said, maybe there's a different way to go about this and to bring that expertise to the table. So we were willing to give it a go and persevered with it, and it's certainly paying dividends for our organisation. And look, we are definitely seeing more and more local governments go down this pathway now. That commercial sort of framework and the expectations of community about being more efficient and being more strategic requires those people with that expertise to be at the table when you're having those conversations.
Have you seen other councils look to you and then maybe not implement the entire model, but take lessons and sort of they're on a journey to try and get there?
Yeah, I certainly have, although you do often still see in organisations where they might appoint the same sort of things as a CFO and a CIO and so on, but they still put it underneath a director. I find that to inhibit a good flow of information. So all of those positions report directly to me as the general manager, and obviously they carry the authority of the office of the general manager when they're dealing with other parts of the organisation. And I just think it gives us a more holistic picture at any point in time. It's not filtered through any other lens.
Now, you mentioned tribal council, and there's probably a lot of people thinking, is that something out of, was it Survivor, I think, has tribal council where people are voted off the island? Or is it just another name for having an executive committee? Where did it come from, and what's the purpose of tribal council?
Yeah, look, it basically came about, we did a leadership colloquium, and we really tried to go back to the roots of what we were trying to achieve as an executive team. And as I've said a couple of times, the diversity of local government often means everybody talks about the silo mentality. The silo mentality is a strong thing, and sometimes it's actually a good thing because people have to achieve outcomes in particular parts of the business. But when we come together as an executive, you have to leave those responsibilities at the door, and we are one tribe and all belonging to the same. So we decided to call ourselves Tribal Council. We don't get to vote the worst performing member off each week or anything like that. But look, it's a bit quirky, and the organisation picked up on it. And look, sometimes people sort of look at it and say, tribal, is that a bit sort of childish or whatever else? But it works for us. We call each other members of the tribe, and all of our values are based around that tribal mentality, and not just at the executive level, then throughout the rest of the organisation as well.
And is that something that you drove as well, having that special language and those shared beliefs, or was that someone else in the organisation?
No, it wasn't just me. I think that's the important thing about this whole concept, is that was an agreement amongst the 8 members of the executive team to become the Tribal Council, because we wanted to portray that message. So that wasn't a Paul Bennett, I think this is a great idea, this is what we're going to do. It was a whole of exec team agreement that was the sort of image that we wanted to push forward. Pretty much the way we operate most of the time. There's a lot more smarter people than me in the organisation. So I take their advice, and if you're going to have ownership and you're going to make it real, then everybody has to be part of the decision.
Now, something that a lot of councils are facing right now is the concepts of transformation, uplift, or needing to spend, and they may say it this way, needing to spend a lot of money on IT very, very quickly because they haven't, and the world has changed. And I understand here at Tamworth, there's a lot of projects on the way from that transformation perspective. When you think of that, and you think of the tribal council and transformation, do you see these as IT things, or do you see these as uplifts to, say, core council functionality?
Yeah, I think the important thing around this is you've got to get the order right, and that is you've got to have a good strategic vision for the organisation and for the community before you can make any decisions about technology and uplift. And for us, a few years back, we developed Blueprint 100, which was our vision as a city and a region to grow to 100,000 population by 2041, and that really gave us a focal point for the things that we wanted to invest. And once you identify what the outcomes are that you want, then you can go and look at the technology and the application. I think too many organisations just see the new shiny toy and just want to buy it and say, oh, that'll be really good because we can use it for X, Y, and Z. But if you haven't identified the problems or the issues or the services that you want to deliver in the first instance, then all you do is end up with, multiple versions of things that end up sitting on the shelf and being underutilised and so on. So ours has really been driven by Blueprint 100. That blueprint sort of mentality has cut across the whole organisation. So we have a workforce blueprint. We now have a technology blueprint. And the technology blueprint is really about that uplift now and making decisions across the organisation where we will make a substantial investment over the next 3 years to better utilise the cloud, have increased mobility in the field, a complete uplift right across the whole of our technology. And because we've got this line of sight to our blueprint and understanding the outcomes we're trying to achieve, it means that we're getting a much smarter spend around technology.
How did that come about? How did you go from, perhaps you might have, as the leader, had a sense we need more direction here, or you're certain maybe feeling things that the organisation needs to do. How did you take that from a strategic approach into forming that fundamental document that was going to guide those years?
Yeah, look, this comes back to your community leadership and certainly your councillors, but the councillors obviously had this desire and vision to continue to grow the city and the region, and I think it's great to have that vision. But if you haven't got a plan, you tend to do things in a very ad hoc way. You might be investing into social infrastructure, or you might be investing into housing or an industrial park or whatever else. But if you don't understand how all those pieces fit together, then it becomes very disjointed and you may get things done in the wrong order. So you might suddenly build an industrial estate, but you've got nowhere for people to live. Anyway, so for us, we did that through a process called a charrette process. And that means you bring everybody into the room and have one conversation. A lot of organisations go out and they'll do it.
But when you say everyone, you're talking council, you're talking tribal council, you're talking team below, really?
I'm talking our councillors, our executive team, managers from across the organisation, external government agencies, local businesses, developers and so on. And we bring them into a room. It's a facilitated discussion. It took us, quite some time to do this, but it's about making sure that when you start a conversation about transport or development or whatever, you're talking about all the other linkages that need to. So if we're talking a major residential estate, we know we've got to provide water, sewer, transport, but you've also got to provide the social infrastructure. You've got to provide, parks. You've got to provide bus stops. You've got to provide all sorts of things. And if you do that in a disjointed way, where somebody's going away and doing a sport and rec strategy, and somebody else is doing a transport strategy, and the two aren't linked, then again you end up with this disjointed, disconnected community. So the vision for the councillors to continue to grow the city, and we look at other very successful cities around the nation, the Ballarats, the Bendigos, the Toowoomba's and so on. And that 100,000 threshold is where you really start to see organic growth. You get better funding from government, you get better transport networks, you get all sorts of things. So the 100 became a real focus for us as a region, but we had to have a plan as to how we were going to achieve that. And that's what we've done. So Blueprint 100 just gives everybody a line of sight to the role that they play and helping us to grow the region to achieve that target.
And for those listening, is Blueprint 100 now a public document that can be found online and people can go and have a read?
100%. We're very proud of our Blueprint 100. In fact, it was held up at a conference in Canberra by the Regional Australia Institute as the model for regional councils in how they should go about strategic planning. So, an exceptional document that's been highly regarded by a lot of other organisations.
Paul, that's fantastic. I'm actually keen now to talk a bit about you and uncover any lessons that we can share with other emerging public sector leaders. So, can I ask you, that moment there when that document was held up, that was obviously something that you as a leader had driven, but you brought people together to make it happen. So was that a moment of pride? Oh,
absolutely. I mean, pride's always a funny word, but I take pride to me personal responsibility in delivering excellence, and we do that as a team. It's a wonderful recognition of the hard work that many people put in that gets held up and said, this is the way you go about it. So yeah, look, it was. I think the real pride comes in seeing that we're actually delivering that document. It's not a strategy that's sitting on the shelf. Sits on my table every day. We have it summarised in different formats so that we know what our 9 pillars are, and everything we do, every council report has to demonstrate how it's achieving an outcome of the blueprint. So,
and do people use the pillar language day to day among the organisation so it's real?
Absolutely. And in fact, the community even use it now as if they want to approach us about funding or a particular project that they want, they say this aligns with this in that pillar.
So you've trained the community in how to align themselves under the strategy. That's fantastic.
And that's how you really know it is successful, when the community embraces it and says, well, we agree with all the things you're trying to achieve, and this is how what I'm trying to do in my little part of the world is also helping council to achieve those outcomes.
So let's talk about you and your success then. How do you know that you're being successful? What do you look at? Is it metrics? Is it those softer things? Is it recognition?
Oh, look, it's a combination of all those things. I think, Elliott, I think, when you sit back as a executive leader, really the effectiveness of the team, the relationships you have with your council, and then through your council with the community, they're all very telling. I think organisations, it's quite easy to see an organisation that is dysfunctional or where the relationships aren't what they should be. And I think the role as a leader, and includes the whole leadership team, is about maintaining the strength of those relationships, because that really does underpin everything. The metrics are great. The metrics are things that you can hold up in front of the community and say, yes, look at what we've achieved. But at the end of the day, sometimes metrics can lack context. If metrics are being achieved but in a cutthroat way, and you've got high turnover and those sorts of things, well, then there'll be some good outcomes from a reporting perspective, but not from a cultural perspective. And so that's one thing that we do strive to do, is to own it, maintain those relationships, maintain this positive vibe, like this optimistic vibe. We're known as an organisation that gets things done. And we're very proud of that reputation.
Explain the optimistic vibe to people listening. That personally resonates with me. With my team, we have values, and we make sure those values reflect how we operate. As a younger business, things change, and we did another values session offsite about 30 days ago, and we introduced the value of optimistic. And because we looked around the room, we actually did an exercise where we wrote up on the board on Post-its people that we used to work with in the past who we'd love to work with us now, or why, and then we analyzed those qualities. What was it about them? I think if we'd started that process with optimism, we'd all be a bit unusual. Why is optimism in value? But each of those people brought the optimism to the room as, why can't we? And if we do this, we should. And we rallied around that. Optimism actually became one of our top 2 values. Felt like it was kind of out of left field, but it's logical sense. So from your perspective, why is optimism important? Where did that come from?
Look, I guess by nature I'm an optimistic person, and when I say optimistic, it has a healthy dose of realism too. When you're in local government, I get a bit, I guess, downhearted when I hear organisations say, we haven't got enough money and we haven't got the right people and we've got all these things. But if you're a true leader, you should be able to identify the pathways which will improve any circumstance. I think that people that are upbeat just naturally attract other upbeat people. They're the people you want to surround yourself with. If you're surrounding yourself with people that say it's all too hard and we've got so many problems, then they eventually wear you down with experience. So I try to surround myself with optimistic people, and I just think it's one of those things in local government in particular where there are so many challenges and you've got a community that wants so many different things. And you've got to be optimistic about the things you can do and not be disappointed about the things that you can't achieve. So yeah, look, it's an important way to just approach every day, I think, having that attitude that, okay, we might have some problems, but we're smart enough to work out how to fix them.
And naturally, you'd be someone who has that approach would be like that across their entire life, right? Like that's a value that's actually personal to them that they then bring into the workplace. Is that something you test for or analyze for as you are hiring, or it's something that is in the back of your mind to make sure it comes out through the process?
Yeah, nothing as complicated as that. I'll take a line from the castle, but it's the vibe. When you meet somebody, you can pretty much pick up, and I'm sure everybody that's listening would know that you can just meet somebody and say they've just got a bit of a spark about them. They've got a great attitude. You can teach people a lot of things, but attitude is a big part of that, and having an optimistic attitude is something that it just resonates with me. So if I see somebody that may not have all the skills or all the things you might want on their resume, but you can teach them those things, I'll go for the attitude every day.
So, Paul, if you look at let's call it the organizational pyramid, right? The general manager or the CEO is at the top, and so you could, some might say you've made it to the top now, which might feel good, and obviously you've got many years ahead of you. Let's look back, perhaps when you weren't at the top and you were starting to climb the rungs, and you knew you were on a track and you knew you were doing good things. At that point in time, where did you go to learn the skills that you needed or plug the gaps that you probably might be quite reflective and realize you needed to improve things? For example, did you have a mentor, a coach? Was it seminars? Can you take us over that?
Yeah. So I became a general manager when I was 33. So that was pretty young. In fact, I think I was the youngest in the state at that stage. But it wasn't about the age thing. It was about I had always been a very inquisitive person, and I didn't just stick to finance, which was what my background and my education was in. I was inquisitive about all the parts of the organisation, and and I had mates in different parts of the organisation as well. So relationships is a big part of it. But I think looking outward, you have to look for the people that have been successful or have those traits that you admire, and you think, if I was going to be a leader, that's the sort of leader I'd want to be. And typically those leaders are the ones that will take you under their wing and give you advice and that mentoring. I've had a lot of mentors, and sometimes I had multiple at the same time for different aspects of my career. Some that were very good at a technical sort of base, some that were really good at the political spectrum, and some that just had great people leadership skills. And I think you need to be looking and learning from all of those different areas. And the networking is professional networking is incredibly important. I got involved in the finance professionals in New South Wales again at a very early part of my career, and then I've maintained that involvement in local government professionals over many years. Was president of the association in New South Wales and was on the national board. And I think the networks and the people you meet through those sorts of opportunities is invaluable, more so than any conference you'll ever go to. Being able to sit around a table and help solve problems with other people really gives you great insight into the way that they think and so on. And I think then you've just got to find your own pathway. I think, it's no point just trying to copy everybody else. You will be unique in your own way, but there's certainly some skills that you can take from everybody else that will just help mature you as a leader.
Let's reflect on you a bit deeper, Way. What do you think's unique about you? Why do you think you found success so early and you've done quite interesting things here at Tamworth?
Well, again, going back to that optimism thing, I think I've always had this attitude that we can pretty much solve anything. I was a very different finance person. I did that for a long time, and one thing people probably don't know about me is that I was going to be a nurse, and I had my heart set on being a nurse when I left high school because I just had this close connection with people and I wanted to look after people and so on. So just because I was good with numbers, it was sort of like these conflicts. So I did my, obviously Bachelor of Financial Administration, but then I did my Masters in HR. And I think that mix between having a good, strong technical skill, but really being focused on people is the thing that sort of made me a little bit different to a lot of others. And I've actually just mentored a young engineer here at Tamworth, and he came to me and he said, I'm really keen to progress. I'd love to be a director. And he's only in his early 30s. And he said to me, I was going to go and do an MBA and, do some finance, that sort of stuff. And I said, you don't need to do that. You need to learn how to work with people because people are the way you achieve things. He's a very, very good engineer. And if he can pick up the people management side of it, he doesn't need to be he can employ a good finance person. And I think that's the key. You can't be all things to all people, but you have to be focused on people. And that was one of the things I learned very early on. I thought I was this, hotshot finance person. I became a general manager at a young age, and I thought I knew everything. And you learn very, very quickly that you don't know everything, and you rely so much on other people to be successful as an individual and as an organisation. So I try to surround myself with people that are all smarter than me, and then that makes me the smartest person in the room.
When you say they're people, there's probably a lot of listeners thinking, yeah, people might be my blind spot too, or the area they should develop. Could you think of that advice you gave that younger engineer, or maybe generally if someone's thinking, yeah, I've got to, people such a broad category, I know I've got to get better. What are some of the practical things they can actually go from making a commitment to improve to? What are some things they could do?
Well, look, one of the things I've always done is, and when I talk about people, I do deliberately do it in a broad thing because it's not about sucking up to the bosses or, just being a nice person to your peers at a management level or anything like that. It's about being nice to the cleaners. It's about being nice to, the people that are out cleaning up the streets and that sort of stuff because, the whole organisation revolves around those people doing the nuts and bolts. And I think you've just got to be able to relate from the lowest level of the organisation. When I was in Narromine, I used to, throw the esky in the back of the car and go out onto a job site and sit down with the guys and, ask them how things were going and whatever else. And if you don't do that at that level, the rest of it sort of is out of perspective. So I think you've really just got to be able to connect with people at all levels, whether they're the leader of the business chamber or somebody that's just opening up a corner cafe. You've got to be able to have a conversation with all those people. So yeah, I guess growing up in a blue collar family probably helped me with that. My father certainly always said to me, you know, you know better than anybody else, but you've got to try to be better than everybody else. So yeah, that sort of stuck with me as well. So that's my advice to young people is once you've got a good technical skill behind you, the rest of it comes down to relationships and the way you work with people at all levels.
Fantastic, Paul. Thank you so much for joining me today. Wow. So there you have it. That was Paul Bennett on business partnering, his tribal council, and how he ensures he has a rounded, informed view from all stakeholders at Tamworth, and how he surrounds himself with optimistic people with the right vibe. I hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks for listening to this episode of Lessons from Local Government Leaders. If you'd like to learn more and build your network directly with other emerging leaders in the sector, head to govtech.org.au. You've been listening to Elliott Donazzan with Paul Bennett, GM of Tamworth Regional Council.